Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, the typhoon that's taken so much. The damage wrought, the cleanup and the recovery. What's it going to cost the Philippines? And what do past disasters tell us? Also this week, the bailout that saved Ireland, but what happened next? We examine the cost of 3 years of austerity as Ireland prepares to exit the bailout scheme. And how the other half live, a trip to the Qatar boat show and on board a $39 million super yacht. Well, it's been all over the news this week, hasn't it? And quite rightly, Typhoon Haiyan hitting the Philippines, and then the enormous task of dealing with its aftermath. So we're going to talk recovery this week, but that in itself is twofold. There's the immediate concern of getting food, water and shelter to those affected, and that's not really gone that well. At week's end, there were still islands where people said they'd had no help at all. More than 9.5 million people were affected, about a tenth of the Philippines' population. Yes, the international community pledged tens of millions of dollars to the aid effort, but as you can imagine, damage to infrastructure has made it pretty difficult to get the aid and services through to the needy.
In a situation like this, nothing is fast enough. The need is massive. The need is immediate. You cannot set anybody aside because everybody, all at the same time, is hungry. All at the same time have no water. All at the same time have no communication, no power. So this is the challenge here. Is almost like D-Day, Normandy.
And then there's the other part of the recovery, the long-term situation and how the typhoon's impact could slow the entire Philippines economy. An economy that's been expanding at a rapid clip as well, 7.6% in the first 6 months of this year. But the affected region accounts for 18% of GDP, most of it agricultural. Around $324 million could be lost from the region's agricultural and fishing industries. On a wider scale, the typhoon may slice as much as 1.4% off the Philippines' economic output. According to the disaster modelling firm Kinetic Analysis, losses in dollar terms could be as high as $15 billion or 5% of economic output. And there's reconstruction to think about too. The government's already set aside 18.7 billion pesos or $429 million for rebuilding. We're going to talk to Daniel Martin about this. He is going to join us from Singapore, Asia economist at Capital Economics. And Daniel, you can give us a sort of historical overview of these sorts of natural disasters, but I do want to start specifically with the Philippines. It has been such a strong Asian economy for some time now. What do you think this disaster will mean for the economy there in the near term?
Well, yeah, you're right. The Philippines has been one of the real success stories in Asia, having been the sick man of the region for so long. And that's because a president has come in, made some very positive reforms that investors like. And at the moment, it looks like the Philippines is going to carry chugging on at quite high growth rates. I don't think that the disaster is going to really change that. If you look around the region, unfortunately, Asia has had its fair share of natural disasters in recent times. And in those disasters, GDP isn't normally greatly affected. And to the extent that it is, there's normally quite a quick rebound afterwards. So even if we see a fall in the Philippines GDP in Q4, maybe even Q1 next year, we don't think it will be long until it bounces back.
We've actually got some of your graphs to bring up here. I'm just going to show them to the viewers. We do see good recoveries. This first graph we've got is the Indian Ocean tsunami. You'll see it come up here, end of 2004. Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand all had, pretty good recoveries after that. And then we've got the second page. We've got the New Zealand earthquake, the Thailand floods, Japan nuclear disaster, all good recoveries again. What is behind that sort of trend?
Well, obviously, once the main disruption is resolved, there does naturally tend to be a return to normality, which gives you this bounce back. Obviously, there's normally a fair bit of pent-up demand as well that gets released. And also in the medium term, it's reconstruction spending as well, as homes and factories and everything has to be rebuilt. That translates into a boost to GDP over the medium term.
Okay, so if we look at, well, this is actually going back to the Philippines situation. One of the features of that economy is the OFWs, as they're known, the overseas Philippine workers who leave and send money back. Their remittances have a huge impact on the economy. Is this possibly a catalyst for more people going overseas?
That can be one of the main ways that a disaster can affect an economy in the long term. We saw after an earthquake in Christchurch in New Zealand in 2011 and after the Kobe earthquake in Japan, people tended to leave the region. That might happen in the Philippines. We know that Filipinos have a tendency to look overseas for employment opportunities anyway. They might be spurred to do this even more, partly because they might reassess how dangerous it is living where they were living, but maybe even more importantly, to earn money to send back to families at home that are struggling. And all of this probably should feed into more of a boost in the Philippines post-recovery than in other countries. Also, the Filipinos already working abroad will probably be moved to send greater amounts of money home as well.
Daniel, you made the point in one of your earlier answers that these sorts of natural disasters are unfortunately just part of life in the region, not just the Philippines, across Asia. Do we just accept that to a degree? Do governments realise that and almost try to build it into their economy so that they can sort of absorb shocks like this?
I'm not sure that you can build it into your economy. What you can do is make efforts to build up infrastructure so that when disasters do occur, they don't have as great an effect on the economy. One thing in Thailand, for example, in 2011, its infrastructure wasn't prepared for the degree of flooding that hit the country. And to be honest, if they had more flood barriers, if they had better infrastructure to cope with it, the effect on the economy probably wouldn't have been as great. So the onus is on governments to look at how they can try to limit damage when these disasters occur, even though you can't predict exactly when they will come along.
All right, Daniel Martin from Capital Economics in Singapore, we thank you for your time. Thank you. And still ahead on Counting the Cost, the company that's only made 7 of its flagship products, but at almost $40 million a pop, you don't have to sell many. That story from the Qatar Boat Show, a little later on. We've got news from the Eurozone this week. Ireland, which could become the first nation in the bloc to exit the bailout scheme. It was just weeks after Lehman Brothers collapsed, triggering the North Atlantic financial crisis, that Ireland found itself fighting to save its own banking system. So it took a $90 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund and its European partners. But with the bailout came austerity. The Irish government had to make cuts. Lawrence Lee has reported from Ireland throughout the crisis. He offers this look now at what the cost has actually been of this so-called recovery.
Stop, Mum. Stop. That's the flouring.
For the first 12 years of her life, Eve had been given government-funded support to deal with her disability. Physiotherapy, speech training, all the things that would help her as an adult. Her parents pay their taxes. That's what you expect in return. But at the stroke of a pen, a letter in the post, it's all gone. Now Mum and Dad have to find the money, even if they have no idea how.
It's thousands a year in services and medical bills that we would have to fund.
If Eve is going to keep progressing at the rate that she did
If Eve is going to,
in the first 12 years of her life.
Exactly. Otherwise, it comes down to a case of, well, what can we afford, and do we prioritise Eve's needs or do we prioritise our bill payments? And that's the base question. And that's an awful place to be in as a parent.
Just a decade ago, Ireland had such ambitions. Yet now, people routinely say they feel flattened, defeated by the experience of the banking crash and the bailout that followed. But the government would say the worst is over. 3 years on from the bailout, they insist Ireland is the first of the so-called peripherals, the poor countries in the Eurozone, to prove it has the fiscal discipline to stand on its own again.
Well, I think the market ultimately gives the best assessment as to whether or not we are believed as a country. Just 2.5 years ago, the cost of borrowing 10-year Irish money was 15.5%. The cost of it at the moment is about 3.5%, lower than Italy, lower than Spain, lower than Portugal and Greece, obviously. And that's an example of the road we've travelled, that effectively our credit worthiness has been re-established by the international money markets.
The government says austerity was necessary, but has it really worked? What exactly are the grounds for this new optimism when the country is in reality poorer rather than richer than it was when the crisis began?
The journey that Ireland's been down during the last 5 years really tells a story of who's won and who's lost during the financial crisis. In 2008, when the American bank started to collapse, Ireland was running debts of around $67 billion. And yet during the course of the next 5 years, when the Irish bank started to collapse and had to be bailed out, That debt quadrupled and now stands at around $270 billion, or a full 123% of all the money that Ireland makes every year. And of course, all the austerity that was brought in still carries on. But because the Irish banks have been recapitalised, the government here says it's now prepared to loosen itself from the European Union and International Monetary Fund support and go it alone again.
For months now, the men from the International Monetary Fund have been living on and off in this luxurious hotel. Every morning they've crossed the road to the Finance Ministry, looking at what they can cut from the budgets. The leaders of the union movement here stopped accepting invitations to meetings with the IMF and European Union. They say the bankers simply weren't listening.
I'd say there are people who have been put in really to do a job essentially for the ECB and the EU, and I think they're people who are chosen not for their feelings or their concerns, you know, they're certainly not social democrats, let's put it that way. So they're put in to do a job, and the job essentially is just simply one tool is used, and that is the tool of fiscal consolidation.
All the poverty the bank bailout created led to a particular crushing realisation for Ireland's young, that like generations before, 30% youth unemployment and low wages were causing many of the brightest to have to emigrate. People like Dan with a master's degree in public affairs whose job in an NGO is at risk, or Owen, an English graduate, now on a 0 hours contract in a superstore, or Moira with a degree in fine art and who's a graphic designer. She's unemployed.
And in Ireland in 2013, you shouldn't be sick, you shouldn't be old, you shouldn't be poor, or you shouldn't be young. People of this country have just taken so much austerity now that we're tired and hopeless.
Everyone that goes will not come back. You know, it's not, what's there to come back for people anymore? You know, what's to encourage them to come back to a country who it's quite obvious that you're not really wanted around the place.
Absolutely, the government is seeing young people as a safety valve. They can just get rid of us through emigration, but it is also true that not everyone can emigrate. It also costs money to emigrate, so a lot of young people will just be driven into poverty.
So the financial recovery here, such as it is, begs the question of what kind of Eurozone Ireland has been so keen to support. The central bank here has been recapitalised. Ireland has plenty of international buyers happy to service its debts, yet apparently the money no longer exists to help a disabled 12-year-old girl. Lawrence Lee for Counting the Cost in Ireland.
So, austerity in Ireland, success or failure? We're going to talk through it with Alan Barrett. He's joining us from Dublin this week. Alan is a research professor, head of economics analysis at the Economic and Social Research Institute. And I do just want a personal thought from you to start, Alan, if I could. When you hear the word, we've got it in our video wall here, Ireland and recovery in the same sentence, what's your initial reaction when you hear that? 3 years now after heading off down the bailout road.
Well, probably mixed emotions about it, in all truth. It is absolutely the case that, stability at least has returned to Ireland. If you think back a number of years ago, it looked like Ireland was falling off a cliff. The economic decline in sort of 2008, 2009 was really quite extraordinary and really quite frightening at a certain point. So the notion now that we have at least stabilised is, a source of great comfort. Recovery is probably a slightly strong word, though. The reality is that, the economy is registering very, very anemic growth. It hasn't really taken off in any shape or form. So that's what I mean by mixed emotions. We're getting more optimistic, though, as we look into 2014. There are signs that a sort of a rate of growth may be beginning to take off more in the region of around 2%, which will really make a dent in the unemployment figures. And let's put it like this, we'll see levels of growth that will, that you can actually feel and will make a difference in people's lives. So, stability is good, but it would still be nicer to see a stronger takeoff.
Look, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually, when you talk about making a difference to people's lives and fixing things like unemployment, because this is where arguably austerity hasn't worked in Ireland. Yes, you have a recovery on paper at least. The banks are recapitalised and they're happy. But what about the people?
No, it's still a tremendously difficult period. I mean, unemployment, although it's coming down, is still well over 13%, and there's no sort of clear sign that it's going to come down dramatically anytime soon. We still are having austerity budgets. The last budget saw a whole range of cuts, and for example, probably one of the most high-profile cuts has been in the area of the health services. So there's no doubt that people are going to be suffering there as well into next year. And of course, the austerity budgets are not actually over. There'll be another significant austerity budget next year. We still have to get our deficit below 3% of GDP. So there's still a certain amount of work to be done. So there's no doubt it is a lot more difficult. But having said that, I think there is a little bit of confidence returning. I think people are beginning to see, the famous green shoots. I think they are beginning at least to see that the austerity budgets, while there's a way to go, there is an end in sight. And of course, the big thing for Ireland is really what happens in the world economy. And we've known for a long time that Ireland is a tiny, tiny place. Really what happens globally matters enormously. So if you take, for example, our nearest neighbours, the recent data coming out of the UK has been an awful lot more positive. Europe, unfortunately, is still stuttering. But, on the assumption that things will take off there eventually, those are the sort of things that will really help to turn Ireland around. What Ireland needed to do over the last number of years was, in a sense, position itself so that when global recovery happened, we could partake in it. I think without the austerity budgets and without getting the public finances into order, there would have been a sense that even if the world took Ireland would still have had tremendous difficulties. That was a lesson we learned in the 1980s, where we sort of delayed fiscal austerity. We had terrible public finances for most of the 1980s. And when parts of the world were doing well, Ireland was still doing badly. So I think we've laid the groundwork now. We've sort of set the foundations for us to participate in a global recovery. And hopefully that's what's going to happen in the coming years.
Enough to bring people back, though, because this is always the great shame in situations like this, is that you have people, young people in particular, who leave. And I'm sure that we've seen this all over the Eurozone. Is there enough to start bringing them back?
I sincerely hope so. I mean, Ireland's economic history is sadly littered with economic collapses, but we've also seen on a good number of occasions, most recently in the 1990s and the early 2000s, that once the Irish economy sort of took off, a huge proportion of the former emigrants do return. There seems to be a homing instinct, not just in Irish people, of course, but in people all over the world. And one of the things we've known actually from sort of previous waves about out-migration and then return migration is that when these folks come home, they actually come back with sort of, enhanced skills. So one of the things we noticed during the Celtic Tiger years that these folks came back, they tended to earn more than people who had stayed in Ireland throughout their careers. So it was as if the Irish labour market actually rewarded people who had got foreign experience.
Quick word then, Alan, on the banks, because as I said before, they're happy, they're recapitalised, they're in good shape now. But has anyone actually been held to account?
Not to the extent that I think the population would like to have seen. Of course, that the really high-profile group here were the people who ran the famous Anglo-Irish Bank, which single-handedly cost the Irish taxpayers 30 billion. At a snail's pace, legal proceedings are happening there. There is an expectation that some of the senior players in Anglo-Irish will eventually be brought to court, but this is a very, very complex legal situation. It is painstakingly slow, there's no doubt about that. And if you're in a sense asking, are the Irish people waiting to see some sort of, revenge or justice, coming into play, I think they're going to have to wait a little bit longer.
Alan Barrett there with his expert knowledge on the Irish economy there. We thank you very much indeed for that, Alan. Finally, this week we're taking you to the other end of the spectrum, what those who don't have to worry about austerity and the like can do with their money. They can go to a boat show. This is the Qatar International Boat Show, which was held this week. And they can buy the most ostentatious and elaborate pleasure craft for prices that only start in the millions. No surprises then that boat builders are going after the Middle Eastern market, though. Despite a long seafaring history, the boat industry is still in its infancy here, but the demand for such craft is comparatively high. We thought it might be interesting to have a look around one of these super yachts and find out what all the fuss is about. And believe me, there's a lot to be fussy about. It is all about what the customer wants. Our guide for the day was Francesco Frediani from the Italian company Over Marine. Francesco, why don't you go ahead first? It's not often, in fact, I think if ever, that I actually do an interview in my socks. But I guess that speaks to the very high level of boat building that we're talking about here. This is not just basic motorboating, is it?
It is not a basic motorboat for sure. This one is a Mangusta 165, 50 meters, and is the fastest and biggest maxi open yacht in the world.
You have to tell me now how much it costs. This is the thing. Our program's called Counting the Cost, so I want to know what the cost is.
Let's say the asking price today is 29 million euro, and then it depends by the specification and by the requirements we have to build on. But we are more or less on that figure.
Okay. So tell me, at a price of 29 million euros, I'm thinking you've got a fairly narrow market here. I mean, who is buying these? How many are you making? What's the market actually like for this?
Actually, we have a very narrow market everywhere. We represent a niche in the luxury yacht market. We built a few yachts per year, but the one we built are fully custom, means fully built according to owner specification.
Let's talk about the industry first and your side of it. You're an Italian company and this super yacht is 100% Italian made. Does that suggest the industry is very strong in Italy? Because all we hear is about, you know, the bad news coming out of Italy, the jobs crisis and austerity problems and all this, but clearly something good going on in the marine industry there.
This is a very good question. Unfortunately, it's something we have to fight with. Every time we go abroad, we travel abroad and out of Italy. Actually, if we look at the Italian industry, and I'm not just talking about marine industry, we are doing much better than our government. Sorry for saying that, but it's actually the truth. Italian industry are still very strong, and most of them are doing very well thanks to the export. Quite surprising in what we consider to be a crisis season, we have built and delivered already 7 units in 4 years, and we are now building and we'll be delivering next year in June 2 more units. We delivered two to the region, to this region, to the Gulf region, two to United States, which is recovering from economic point of view and doing much better than 2-3 years ago. And we are looking to Far East as well, even though Far East is still a long-term project. Of course, Middle East is the place to be. There's money around, and it's the first requirement for our industry. What we are experiencing over the last 3-4 years, there is more interest in keeping the boat here in the region, and it means that the domestic market is growing up. And this is very important news for us, and that's why we are here.
Should I show you the interior now?
I'd
love to. I've got a sneaking suspicion I don't even have to touch the door handle here. Look at that. It's going to open by itself.
Please.
Lovely. Thank you. Gosh, look at this. Is this, I was going to say, is this typical of what you'd find inside one of your boats, or is there no such thing as typical when it comes to designing a super yacht?
Actually, there's nothing typical, because each boat, each Mangusta is built according to customer specification and according to the use of the boat. That can be a private or commercial means for charter activity.
So again, earlier you were telling me that nothing is typical.
No.
And I'm guessing that's the case here. I mean, we've seen 4 bedrooms that way and then a master bedroom this way with separate... What you tell us about it, you tell us.
Yeah, sure. This is very special requirement. This boat has been designed for charter use. And what we realize is a very large master cabin with a full beam bathroom, which is shared in 2 different parts. One for the lady with a bathtub, and one for the gentleman with a very big shower and steam sauna as well. Nothing is typical. Materials, style, decoration, everything is decided together with the owner. This decoration, for example, is very, let's say, Arab tradition, following the Arab tradition and for the local market, but we can interpret the desire and the requirements of any boat owner by doing the design he likes and the design he wants to have from us.
Can I see? I just want to see what this is.
Sure, don't worry.
Careful of my microphones and all that. Oh yeah, very comfortable, very nice. I don't want to mess anything up. I'll be perfectly honest with you. It's too... I feel like I'll get in trouble if I don't leave it nicely. We should probably go before I mess anything else up. Yep, didn't break a thing. Quite proud of myself, actually. That is our show for this week. More for you online, of course, at aljazeera.com/business. The latest business headlines are there. Also, all of our previous episodes for you to catch up on. You can get in touch as well. You can tweet me at Kamal AJE, our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, or drop us an email. Counting the cost at aljazeera.net is the address. Just a quick word about next week's show. We're going to be out of the studio, coming to you from the Dubai Air Show for a look at all things aviation. So do keep a lookout for that one. That's it for this edition of Counting the Cost, though. I'm Kamal Santa Maria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.